Welcome to Psychology of Pilgrimage. In this episode, I am joined by Daniel H. Olsen, who is a professor and chair of the Department of Geography at Brigham Young University. Dan, it's amazing to see you. I wish we would have been capturing our brilliant conversation before we started recording, because who knows, we may have made the most profound discoveries yet in pilgrimage studies, but it wasn't recording.
Well, it's nice talking to you.
Yeah. Well, that's a wrap.
Yep.
People are going to just have to tune in like through ESP to know what we were talking about.
It's good to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to exploring a bit of who you are and how you got to pilgrimage studies and geography and religious tourism and dark tourism and dark pilgrimage. And I also want to pick your brain because I'm very curious about Mormon pilgrimages, and you have some experience and expertise in that area. So I guess we can get on the train here. You are a professor at Brigham Young University in the Department of Geography. Are you still the chair?
I am. I've been chair for almost 5 years now.
Okay, time flies, because in my mind it was like 2 years ago, but I guess it's been 5.
Loving every minute of it.
Yeah. How did you become interested in geography?
So I don't know what it's like throughout the rest of the states in the United States, but in the state of Utah, there's only one geography class that you're required to take. In fact, I think there's only one class that's offered, and that's in grade 9. But in Canada, where I am from, we like to pride ourselves on our geographical literacy. And so in high school, at least when I was in high school, we had about 6 or 7 different geography classes that we could take. And for whatever reason, I just loved those geography classes. I loved maps. I loved looking at human nature interactions. I was really interested in religion as well, someone who is religious. And so in my senior year, there was a teacher that came to me and said, Dan, it seems like you have this really strong love and aptitude for geography. There is a university called the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada, which is about a half-hour drive from our high school. And they want a high school student to do a presentation on what the United Nations called Vision 2020, which was the forerunner for the Sustainable Development Goals, and asked if I would do this presentation. So I did all the research and I did this presentation, and everyone clapped for me. And I thought, this is pretty cool that I can take my love for geography and I can share that love with others, and they like the work that I do. So when I finished high school, I said, what do I want to do with my life? I have no idea, but I love geography. And so I did undergraduate at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada, in geography, and graduated and said, I don't know what to do with my life, but I still love geography and I want to learn more about it. So I went to Bowling Green State University in Ohio, and I did a master's of education with an emphasis on recreation and leisure. And from my undergraduate for that thesis, I looked at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They have shared historical sites in Nauvoo, Illinois, Kirtland, Ohio, and Independence, Missouri, which were important to the history of those faiths. And they're geographically adjacent to each other, but they interpret those sites differently. So I wanted to understand why they have the same shared religious heritage, but interpreted their faiths differently. So that was my master's, and I graduated and said, what do I want to do with my life? I don't know, but I love teaching and I love the research, so I'm going to do a PhD. Back to the University of Waterloo, where I used the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a case study to look at sacred site management, focusing on Temple Square in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is their Axis Mundi. And then as I was doing all of that, I got a job offer and became a professor. And I still love geography. I love teaching. I love research. I love writing on pilgrimage and religious tourism in combination with geography.
That's really fascinating, to well, the your master's thesis is fascinating, and it seems like really gave you a lot of insight into the meaning of sites. The site is the same. I mean, that's the constant variable, but how people see the site, the meaning they create around it, and also when you're looking at the religious aspect and two similar religious organizations, uh, but the site is viewed differently. So. What did you learn? What were some of the differences in how these sites were viewed?
Well, the both of the faiths come from Joseph Smith, who in the 1820s had a vision and saw God the Father and Jesus Christ the Son, and was told that he was supposed to restore the Church of Jesus Christ as found during the time of Jesus Christ. So, because of persecution, all the followers of Joseph Smith went from place to place till he was martyred in a place called Carthage, Illinois. And from there was a schism because Joseph Smith had laid out several different plans of who my successor is going to be. Most of the saints, church members, followed Brigham Young and went to Salt Lake City, Utah, and that's where we get the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But some of the followers decided to follow Joseph Smith's son, Joseph Smith III, and they called themselves the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, later, or at least now known as the Community of Christ. So all the way from the beginnings of the church to the martyrdom of Joseph Smith, they have all these different sites where angels were seen, revelations were given, priesthood was restored, very special events in church history took place. And there was a competition between the two faiths who would own and control these sites. So sometimes you would have one faith that would control this piece of property, and right across the street, the other faith controlled this type of property. So the community of Christ has gone away, my understanding is, from, for example, the Book of Mormon being a book of scripture, in the sense that the Book of Mormon is the happenings of the people that lived in the Americas and how they came to Christ. That's not seen as historically accurate, whereas the Latter-day Saint Church sees that as historically accurate. When you go to the different sites, what you will find is that with the community of Christ, it tends to be third person interpretation. It tends to be very academically oriented and factual. Whereas if you go to some of the Latter-day Saint sites, it's first person, where you go to Nauvoo and here comes Brigham Young walking down the street in persona and talking to you, or, different characters in church history. Nauvoo, Illinois, controlled by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has sometimes been referred to as the Williamsburg of the West, where they're trying to kind of reinvent the nostalgia, the history, what it would have been like for you if you're walking down the streets of Nauvoo in the 1840s. So those are some of the differences. The Community of Christ has recently started to sell a lot of their historical sites to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, like the Kirtland Temple, the first temple built by the church in the late 1830s. That has been sold to the Church of Jesus Christ. So it seems like the Community of Christ is kind of getting away from their history and becoming a bit more Protestant in focus, whereas the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints seems to really hold on to their faith. In fact, in the church, the historians are the theologians, because history and theology are really tightly tied together. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has several different locations across the United States, from the birthplace of Joseph Smith in Vermont to the Hill Cumorah, where the golden plates were found in upper state New York, and where the church was established and where the Book of Mormon was printed, to Kirtland, Ohio, Nauvoo, Illinois. We have the Mormon Trail, Salt Lake City. We also have in San Diego, we have the Mormon Battalion, which is where during the trail from Nauvoo to Salt Lake City, the U.S. Army came in and said, "We're fighting a war with Mexico," and a whole bunch of male members of the church left, never saw battle, but ended up in San Diego, and they were actually part of the initial gold rush at the time. So there's a place where you could go to kind of visit and learn more about that particular battalion. So all across the United States, the church owns several different sites that members of the church and even non-members of the church will go and visit for historical reasons, for uh, religious identity formation. There's also a lot of temples around the United States where members of the church will go to perform ordinances or religious rituals for themselves, but also for those who have passed away. And those all become quasi-pilgrimage sites.
Was thinking as you were describing these different sites and also the movement of people affiliated with the LDS Church and the splinter group. Is it right to call it a splinter group? Is that
I think, well, there's a whole bunch of splinter groups, not just the
okay?
two we're talking about, under the rubric of Mormonism or that
Okay.
umbrella. So they're all splinter groups in essence, but
Okay.
keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Um, So I was thinking it really makes sense to me how you would become interested in maps and geography as someone who grew up in the church. And I mean, I was even one of the reasons that even wanted to talk to you about the pilgrimages too during this episode, which we had planned. But then I just discovered this pilgrimage that happened, this bicentennial wagon train pilgrimage that happened across the United States in 1975 and 1976. And seeing the map prompted me to recall growing up in Southwest Wyoming, where the Mormon Trail crossed, and the Oregon Trail, and then north of us, the Bozeman Trail. But I very much remember going to the Days of 47 in Utah, in Temple Square as a child, because probably so many other people that I knew were going to this event. And I had never thought about that as a pilgrimage until I saw this map, and then I thought, oh, I want to talk to Dan about if this event is seen as a pilgrimage, and then also with all of these sites. And I heard you just say they're pilgrimage sites. Yeah, I just want to explore this a bit. Like, what is pilgrimage within the LDS tradition, and who goes on the pilgrimages? What happens? Is it a one-off visit to a site? Is it a quote unquote journey to get to different sites? I want to hear all about it from you.
Thank you. I'd love to see that map, by the way, sometime. Uh, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there is no formal theology of pilgrimage. In part because usually when we think of pilgrimage, we think of Roman Catholicism, where you go to a site and you get some sort of merit. Even in Hinduism, I think you travel for some sort of merit. In the Roman Catholic Church, I understand that you can travel, you can light candles for your soul, for the souls of those who have been deceased, so they don't have as much time in purgatory, that sort of thing. So there's no otherworldly merit for going necessarily. So pilgrimage in and of itself is not something that we tend to use in the terminology of the church, at least from a theological perspective. From a grassroots perspective, we can't talk about pilgrimage, the act of travel to a site that is meaningful to you. Many, many members of the church and even church leaders have recommended that families, parents take their children or go as youth groups or as congregations and go visit some of these church historical sites. And I think the reason for that is several fold. But the main reason being that when you go to these sites, there's something about being in place, being at a location that adds something to the experience. It's one thing for me to read about the New Testament lands, the Holy Land. It's a totally other thing to be there and experience the spirit of place. So by taking your family or taking youth groups or congregants to these sites, they're more apt to have a deeper, more meaningful experience when they go and walk into places and see the buildings and hear the stories where they took place. That is going to do something to you. In the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, we believe that when truth is taught, the Spirit or the Holy Ghost is present. So if you have people that go to these sites and you have these missionaries who are usually dressed in period costume and kind of interpreting the site in a particular way, what the hope is that you will feel something. When truth is taught, the Spirit will testify. And if you're a member of the church, it's going to solidify your faith and make it stronger. If you're not a member of the church and you feel something, then the sister missionaries say, well, that's the Holy Spirit telling you that what we're teaching is true. When you go home, we'll send you some Latter-day Saint missionaries to teach you more. So it's kind of again, a dual purpose when people come. If you're a member, you want to solidify faith. But if you're not a member, we actually want to shift your faith. We want to shift your religious identity or spiritual identity to learn more about the church and maybe become a church member at one point. Or at the end of the day, at least going away saying, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints aren't as bad as I thought they were. You had mentioned this reenactment of the Mormon Trail. So this is something that began as a grassroots movement a couple of decades ago, where in order to, so if I'm in Australia, what connection do I have to church history? Because it's across the ocean. It's so far away. But what I can do is I can reenact my faith by going on these pilgrimage treks or this reenactment. So we build these hand carts. We put a whole bunch of provisions on them. I dress in period costume and I find a place in Australia that's kind of off the beaten path, that's a little difficult to travel, and I walk for 3 or 4 days. And this happens in Africa. This happens in Europe. This happens in Southeast Asia. This happens all over the world, where youth groups will get together and they will walk to commemorate this shared pioneer heritage that they have with members of the church in the United States. The church has recently professionalized this, where here's the handbook that you need to follow. So that way that the messaging is the same, the experiences are the same, and there's some level of control over what does or does not happen. Whether it is for spiritual reasons or I'm guessing maybe for financial, logistical, or insurance reasons. And what happens often is that if you're a youth and you're participating in this journey, you'll be given a name of a piece of paper with a little name, with a name and a bio of one of these pioneer ancestors or the pioneers across the plains. And you will learn about them. You are walking as if you are them. So you're kind of binding the generations together of here's someone who walked, here's me, and I'm walking in remembrance of that particular person. And in that case, what you're really doing is you're walking for the dead. You are walking for deceased individuals who have walked that path before, but now you're walking it again, and you're starting to have an intergenerational connection between the pioneers and the youth of today. And so even though we don't necessarily use the term pilgrimage, again, from a theological perspective, we do in terms of it's a movement across the Earth's surface for a religious purpose that helps to build and shape and strengthen our religious identity.
There are a lot of parallels in what you're describing with battlefield tourism and pilgrimage in terms of uh, the act of commemoration and or reenacting an event or series of events in the exact place where they happened, or in the case of people who may not be doing it in the exact place in the United States, it's a reenactment of events that actually happened. Very oftentimes, someone who is doing a battlefield pilgrimage will have studied about a particular soldier, or service member, and so they know the backstory, and they're coming to the place with this information to be in the exact space where a person fought and or died. And the connection then with the ancestors, it could be a biological ancestor, or it could be just another human. So that connection, or maybe someone is in the same military unit, for example. And so there's that connection to that ancestor. So there's some very interesting parallels there. Um, and I want to come back to a couple of points about what would be considered kind of this handcart pilgrimage. For people who may not know about the movement of LDS members across the United States, they were forcibly exiled out of a number of places and ended up in Salt Lake City um, in the mid to late 1840s. Right.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, why was this called the Days of 47? It is so this event in Salt Lake is then commemorating the arrival. Is it the arrival, or is it a
The
building of a
arrival of
temple?
Brigham Young
Okay.
and his Vanguard Company into the
Yeah.
Salt Lake Valley.
Okay. Which was called Zion, right? Was
Uh,
Salt Lake known as this, or the all of Utah?
no, Zion was given by Joseph Smith the designation for a very specific area in Jackson County, Missouri,
Okay.
which was designated as Zion, or the future city of Zion on the American continent. So the belief is that one day Zion will be restored, and that Salt Lake City will probably no longer be the center of the church, but that people will move to this city that one day will be built in Missouri.
Have I told you that I have a family? My family history is in the exact location. We were not LDS, but many members of my family moved from North Carolina into Kentucky and into Davis County, Missouri, right at the time of the Mormon War there. I think, actually, unfortunately, one of my great, 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 great uncles was involved in the Mormon War. And then after the LDS families were forced out, then many of my other family members moved in. And so I've just started learning a lot of this history and have been curious about whether some of them actually may have um, joined the church and moved west. I don't know that yet, but I'm curious about it.
Interesting.
Uh, Yes, I found a dossier on one of my relatives who was not kind to the Mormon community, and um, there was a trial where he was tried, and he was actually acquitted of his actions. But anyway, that's probably a side issue. That's a whole other podcast episode for a different day. Um, for a much different day. But I find this very compelling. The movement across the United States, and of course to the terrain where I grew up. So from visually, I can picture the wagon ruts, and I can recall many families who lived around me talking about their ancestors coming into this area. And I wonder about what that means for pilgrimages, because it does seem that this idea of a family history of exile leads one to go searching for something. And does that play a role in um these visits, or the tourism to the religious sites?
I think so. There are some members of the church who have ancestry back to the pioneers that crossed the United States. I have an ancestor, Benjamin Franklin Johnson, who was the secretary to the prophet Joseph Smith, and he came across the plains and came to the United States. And so sometimes people, members of that particular family, will go back just to say, oh, my great grandfather was here, or these are the events that he was involved in. I think a lot of members of the church today don't have that ancestry, but the sites are there to recognize God's hand in the history and the reestablishment of his church in these days. It's interesting. Sometimes I ask my students the question, would the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints maintain these sites if no one ever visited them? And they usually say no, because it takes money to maintain these sites. But the church doesn't charge anyone to go to their sites. And if no one came, why would they do that? As part of the prayer that we say every Sunday when we go to at church, when we partake of the sacrament, we make promises to remember and to witness. And by maintaining these church historical sites, we are remembering and witnessing the hand of God in the reestablishment of his church. So the church does this, maintains these sites because of this. It has nothing to do with visitation. But the church also understands they have 18 million people from almost every country around the world that holds to this faith. What are the ties that bind? How is it that someone in Australia can feel a connection to someone in Singapore who's a member of the church if they don't have a shared history? And not just a history from a book, but you can actually go and tangibly be in the locations and touch and feel. And that's, I think, another reason why the church maintains these sites. It's a physical manifestation of religious identity. Now, a lot of church members are never going to get to go to these sites. But during COVID, when no one was going to any of these sites, church leaders said, well, how are we going to get people to visit these sites? We have all these missionaries that are there and they have no one to talk to. So they would do recordings and post them online. And then they realized that, well, all these youth groups and all these church members actually want to have live tours. So they would then host live tours. And then they continued to make videos, because if you're in Russia and it's a 12-hour difference, there's no way you're going to get a live tour. So all of a sudden, church leaders begin to realize that you can still have people have an experience online that's similar to, but not quite the same as being in person. But is there a way that you can have the Spirit be present? For people to have a spiritual experience online while you are in place. And again, it's about the messaging. And can you help people feel like you're actually there? So members of the church will visit in person, but they'll also visit virtually. And the hope is that as long as you're visiting and the interpretation is good and the Spirit is present, you can have a similar experience, not exactly the same, but again, a similar experience online as you are having in person.
It seems like because of some of the controversies around the origins of the church, that the physical sites would be absolutely critical in underpinning the authenticity of events as they have been described.
No, that's true. Authenticity is really important to the church. In fact, when you go to the home that Joseph Smith lived in, when he found the gold plates from which he translated the Book of Mormon, the church purchased that site a long time ago and recently discovered that the interior of that building was not the way it actually was. They found this is where there should have been a stairwell, but that stairwell was taken out, the stairs were put somewhere else. And so the church has been very meticulous in making sure they're trying to recreate the way things actually were at the time. or trying to find the Aaronic priesthood commemoration site, like where, according to Joseph Smith, John the Baptist came to him and conferred upon him the Aaronic priesthood so that he had the authority to baptize. Well, Joseph Smith just said it was somewhere along this riverbank. So the church has been very careful trying to look at all the existent records, anything they can find. So they're pretty confident within this small area, this is where this event took place. Because if it's not where the event took place, then it's really hard to feel the spirit when this really isn't the location. So there is something to be said about place or place-based authenticity that helps when you're talking about truth and the witnessing of the spirit to that truth. So I think you're right. It's really important for the psyche of the church, for the identity of the church, and for church members to know that this is the place, this is where this occurred, this is where this occurred, this is where this occurred, because that it grounds you, literally grounds you in terms of my faith has physical manifestations and it has a geography to it.
What are the top 3 sites that are viewed as the most sacred within the LDS church? Or
Well, I can give you my opinion. The first one is Temple Square in Salt Lake City, Utah. This is where, again, Brigham Young, when he took over membership of the church, brought the saints to the Salt Lake Valley. This is a 10-hectare site where you have the Salt Lake Temple, which took 40 years to build. It's currently under renovations. This is where you have the first tabernacle that's seated a few thousand people. This is where the conference center is. This is where the church has its headquarters. It's the Rome, in essence, of the Latter-day Saint Church. They receive 5 to 6 million visitors a year. Probably 50% members of the church, 50% non-members. But this is where the semi-annual general conference is held every year. This is where church leaders live and reside, and from where they leave to go and spread the good news. So that's probably the number one site. It's been called by many scholars and experts as the axis mundi of the church. I think another important site is Carthage, Illinois. Joseph Smith was taken to jail in Carthage and was waiting trial when a mob came and killed him and his brother Hiram. And so this is a place of commemoration, a place of grief, a place of mourning for the founder of the church where he died. And so it is a dark tourism site, and I've written on that before. So that's a really important place for Latter-day Saints. Another location is Palmyra, New York. This is where Joseph Smith lived and where he had what we call the first vision or his epiphany. It's where he found the golden plates in the side of a hill called Hill Cumorah. This is where in this town of Palmyra, where the Book of Mormon was translated. The church owns the publication site, owns the Hill Cumorah, owns the place where Joseph Smith had his epiphany and the home in which he lived during that time. This is a place where a lot of members of the church like to go because it really is the theological establishment of the church through this epiphany, through the publication of the Book of Mormon, another scripture which Latter-day Saints believe is akin to the Bible, and that it testifies of the divinity of Jesus Christ.
do families visit these 3 sites as like part of one trip, where maybe they start in New York and they go to Carthage and then end in Salt Lake City?
So one of the reasons why I became interested in religious tourism and pilgrimage was because when I was 14 years old, my father took myself and the 3 next oldest children. I'm from a family of 8, so took the first 4 and drove us from Canada to New York, and we went to Palmyra. And from there, we traveled to Kirtland, Ohio, and saw the sights. We went to Independence, Missouri, and saw the sights. We went to Nauvoo, Illinois, and saw the sights. Then drove across the western part of the United States to Salt Lake City, where we finished our trip. So he took us on a pilgrimage and visited all these religious sites. I still have the scrapbook with all the pamphlets and pictures and of somewhere in my files. And that had a really deep and meaningful impact on me. So when I had to go to Sunday school and learn about the pioneers and learn about what happened in Nauvoo, or as they were crossing the Great Plains of the United States, I could say, I've been there. I've seen that. I've done that. And that had such an effect on me that when I was doing my undergraduate and graduate work, I decided to use my faith, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as a case study to take a look at broader principles and ideas related to pilgrimage and religious tourism. So every year, thousands of members of the church will drive. They might go to New York to Kirtland and that's it, or they might do the entire trail. But that is something that has become a bit of a tradition among practicing Latter-day Saints. One, especially when you want to raise a faithful generation within your faith, you want to take them to the religious sites. You want them to feel the Spirit of the Lord. You want them to have these spiritual experiences in the place where different church events occurred so that you can solidify and strengthen their faith. So as they are building their own testimonies, the history of the church is a part of that. That's also why we take our youth to temples. Not only can they do do rituals for themselves, but also rituals for the ancestors who have passed away, because of the belief that everyone needs to be baptized. And so what happens to those who never had an opportunity on this earth to be baptized and to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior? Well, if someone didn't have an opportunity, one of the youth can go as proxy and be baptized on behalf of that person. And because of the function of that religious ritual, travel to these temples and back might be seen as pilgrimage as well.
Did you call the trip that you took with your father and brothers or siblings?
Yeah,
Did you call it a pilgrimage at the time?
I did not. I really didn't understand what a pilgrimage was. Again, it's not a part of our vocabulary in the
Hmm.
church until recently to talk about pilgrimages. It was just we were going to see some church historical sites. It was like heritage tourism in essence, but it just happens to be religious heritage.
Hmm.
So I never thought of it as a pilgrimage. Looking back, I could see why. But again, I wasn't praying for people's souls. I wasn't lighting candles. The Latter-day Saints are much more Protestant in their views when it comes to pilgrimage, about icons, and we don't pray to special people within church history. So I think that's why there's been a bit of an aversion to using the term pilgrimage. I used the term quasi pilgrimage earlier in this podcast
Hmm.
because I understand where it'd be seen as a pilgrimage going to a site of meaning, but we also don't want to confuse it with Catholic views of pilgrimage. And so it is a pilgrimage, but again, the purposes and what you get out of it are going to be a little bit different from faith to faith. And that's why I'm sometimes reticent to call it a pilgrimage.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it makes sense that that you would not use a term that is not, as you said, readily available, nor does it have the same type of meaning.
Hmm.
Is the term gaining traction within the church, or is it still something that is seen as, well, this is Catholic, like you said, quasi pilgrimage? Is
Hmm.
it a way to say, well, these are the practices that we're doing while we're engaged in this type of tour, but we are not using the term pilgrimage?
I've heard more and more members of the church use the term pilgrimage or seen it in some writings. But I think again, it's just not a term that we tend to use frequently. It might be, well, I'm going to the temple, is what we'll say. Not, I'm going on a pilgrimage to the temple.
Hmm.
So while in some non-scholarly writings, more cultural writings in the church, you'd hear the word pilgrimage. Again, there seems to maybe I don't really know what at the official level what leaders think. I don't want to speak for them, but I don't see the word pilgrimage in any or really any real official church documents. The way that you would see, for example, in the Roman Catholic Church that has many publications using the term pilgrimage. So while it's very similar, again, it's more about the verbiage and how you describe it that is different.
Mhm. What about trips to the Holy Land? I recognize that there are a lot of people in the church who are making these visits to the Holy Land. Is that called a pilgrimage?
You'll see it in the tourism brochures called A Pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Uh, there's actually a very small Latter-day Saint tourism community in Salt Lake City and in the Utah Valley, which is the valley just south, where they focus only on Latter-day Saints. And they take them on church history tours. They take them on cruises for young single adults to meet and greet. They will do trips to the Holy Land. They will do cruises following the travels of Paul the apostle. So there is a small tourism niche market specifically for Latter Day Saints, and many of them will go to the Holy Land, and they may consider that a pilgrimage because they're going to walk in the steps where Jesus walked. There's also just this whole historical view that when you go to the Holy Land, as we talked about before we started broadcasting or recording, that because the event's called a pilgrimage, they will use the term pilgrimage, and that they will consider themselves to be pilgrims in that essence. But if you're going to the temple and it's not called a pilgrimage, you're not going to use that terminology.
Mhm.
So I think when you sign up for an event called the pilgrimage to the Holy Land, then, hey, I'm going on a pilgrimage. Otherwise, you're going on a trip somewhere.
Yeah, and that's so fascinating to me that I've spent so much of my work looking at individual motivations for why people call a pilgrimage, and so it's just an interesting kind of m mi mind-bending, exercise to consider that some people call themselves pilgrims because an event that they signed up for or an event that was sponsored was called a pilgrimage, and then therefore they're pilgrims. It's, it's almost like, well, they just took this easy way. Like, they didn't have to really grapple with whether this is a pilgrimage and I'm a pilgrim because the event was called a pilgrimage and therefore I'm a pilgrim.
Mhm. And sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder. That was your idea pre-recording, so that's all yours. But yeah, wouldn't it
Well,
be
yeah,
nice if
this was one of the brilliant things I was talking about that we talked about.
wouldn't it be nice if someone could just tell us what we're supposed to call ourselves when we travel, so we know exactly who we are and what we're supposed to do? But that's what makes pilgrimage
Yes,
messy. I read a paper recently
yes,
that I was reviewing that was talking about how uh, Muslim pilgrimage is different from any other type of pilgrimage. In fact, it shouldn't be called a pilgrimage at all because it was so
really.
different from other religious faiths that you need to find another term because it's not pilgrimage, because Catholic pilgrimage, Protestant pilgrimage, Hindu pilgrimage all waters down the meaning of what Muslim pilgrimage means as a term. And I didn't find their argument very meaningful, in part because what they were describing was basically what everyone does in all the different religions. They just wanted to kind of set apart that my faith, because we do it differently or have different meanings behind the term, it's not really a pilgrimage. It's something more than a pilgrimage. But again, from an academic perspective, I understand why you think that the way you do things is different than the way that others do things. But at the end of the day, the heart of it is you are traveling for religious reasons, for a religious purpose. Or even
Mhm.
if you're not, when you're going to a religious site, which makes it a religious trip, at least. Whether it's a pilgrimage or not really comes down to the demand side, the motivations, what I'm feeling, what I want to feel, or what I do feel when I go to a site.
It does seem that the word pilgrimage is so all-encompassing that it's really not helpful. And from this, it sounds like this writer's perspective, the act that we know of and that Muslims know of as the Hajj is so much different than someone visiting Graceland, for example, that there's
Hmm.
no possible way we could be talking about the same phenomenon.
Yeah, the word pilgrimage has really been watered down in the last couple of decades to where it's basically any trip that has meaning to you. So going to the grocery store to buy turtles, the chocolate, which I love, it's one of my great weaknesses in life. I might say that was meaningful to me because look what I got from it. I got a thing of turtles, so that was
Yes.
a pilgrimage to me, and I question that. I think sometimes we have to do a better job at when the people take a term and they expand it to such an extent that it becomes meaningless. Then we have to figure out how do we bring meaning back to the term pilgrimage and really differentiate what exactly we mean. For some people, it doesn't matter. I go on a trip. I It was meaningful to me. I'm going to call it a pilgrimage. Good for you. But when it comes to management, when it comes to understanding motivation, when it comes to how do I sell a trip to the Holy Land, when it comes to I got all these people coming to my religious site, what do they want? What are their motivations? Who's on a pilgrimage? Who's not? Because they'll want different experiences. They'll want to do different activities. I really need to understand what this term is about and who's calling themselves a pilgrim and who's not, so that I can better cater to the wants and needs when they come to my site. Or how do I get them to go on my tour? Or who's going to donate more money at the donation box when they come into my site? So I think there is some practical value in trying to determine who's a pilgrim, who's a tourist, or how do I get tourists to become more pilgrim-like when they come to my site? Whether it's financial reasons, but even more importantly, for spiritual reasons. At the end of the day, people want to figure out who they are and why they're here and where they're going. And how can we do a better job as academics or as religious site managers, religious leaders? How do we help people to find themselves, to lead a better quality of life? And at the end of the day, help them when it comes to the salvation of their souls. We need to know these things so that we can do things better in these areas.
Yeah, you're bringing up this entire uh, side of the literature that I'm less familiar with around management of sites and management of people and processes and planning, and that is that is a really interesting consideration when looking at what the word pilgrim means.
Yeah. And I don't think we do a very good job talking about management. A lot of times we look at religious site management from a tourism perspective because there are lots of masters of arts or sciences in tourism management, but not in religious site management. So we take a look at it from what we might call a secular perspective. How do we get people to go to a location? How do we move them at a site? How do we maintain reverence, sanctity? Those are all important things, but it's all about the experience of the tourists. But we really don't talk to the religious site managers and say, your faith has been doing this for hundreds of years. What have you learned that we can learn from so that we can actually manage tourism better, not just religious sites? So I think talking to religious leaders and religious site managers is something that we need to do more of. They're on the ground day to day. They're the ones that take confession in many cases. They're the ones that have to deal with disruption. They're the ones that have to do site interpretation. And they're the ones that, at the end of the day, have to make sure the site functions in a certain way that preserves it for future generations. How do they do that? And I wonder if they are as concerned as we are as academics in terms of who's a pilgrim, who's a tourist, or do they see them as someone who's
No, I
come
don't think they are. Yeah.
or 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 maybe they are because if I'm a member of that faith community, I'm going to talk to you differently than if you're not a member of that faith community. So maybe I am actually interested in that, or maybe I'm not. because all I care about is the donations. At some religious sites, the priests are so concerned about the material uh, management and how do I pay for rent this month? It's not rent, sorry, but for the heating and the lighting. And I want you to put as much money into that box as possible that it might detract from the actual spiritual side of the management. And so, how do we balance the financial? Because every religion needs a material base. Let's just get that out of the way right now, because there's so much talk about how, well, religion's selling themselves. Well, if you don't have that material base, you don't exist. So all religion is going to sell itself in some way or ask for donations. They need that material base to survive. But how do you balance that within the spiritual side of things? And especially in Western society, we seem to have this imbalance. We think that religious sites should all be about the spiritual and not the monetary. But if you take away the monetary, there's no spiritual because the site is gone. But in Eastern traditions or cultures, there's a very strong tie between the monetary and the spiritual. And so I think we also have to look at it from a cultural context perspective. Different cultural groups are going to look at commodification differently than other cultural groups. And so lots of great scholars like Kieran Shindy, for example, who takes, a very different perspective than what we would in the United States or Europe in terms of how do we manage religious sites. We need to do more have more cross-cultural conversations as well, not just how is it done in Europe, but how is it done in Southeast Asia? How is it done in India? How is it done in Africa? How is it done in Latin America? And see if we can come to some sort of consensus, at least learn best practices of how do we understand how we should manage religious sites, especially when you get people from all over the world coming to Temple Square in Salt Lake City, Utah. And how do
Mhm.
you cater to their wants and needs and motivations, and also their languages when you got a worldwide church and millions of people coming every year to visit?
Yeah, I was as you were talking about this pilgrim tourist, uh, uh, what we have known as sort of a continuum, and many of our thoughts before the recording were about this. I was thinking about the example of the Hajj, and the case of Saudi Arabia would be interesting because all people who are coming to Mecca are going to be during the Hajj at least, are going there is not a differentiation between a tourist and a pilgrim because
Mm-hmm.
everyone broadly is falling under being there because they are participating in the Hajj. And so I think that is one very concrete example of a community, a city, and then all of the tourism planners who are not considering, at least during this time of the year, that people are also tourists. They may be considering them in the sense that they need accommodations and they need food, and people are going to maybe be engaging in commercial activity before and after the pilgrimage, but there is no differentiation between the identity of the person who is there during this pilgrimage.
As you were speaking, I just wrote down for my own notes closed versus open pilgrimage systems. So, what
Yes.
you're describing is a closed pilgrimage system where only members of a certain faith community
Mhm,
are allowed to enter into a very specific religious area, in this case, a region with different sites. And they are vetted and they have to get special visas to enter. And then they're expected to do all the same things. It is a great way to build religious community and to
mhm,
build faith, but it's a closed system. So what happens if you're at Lourdes and you know that most of the people who are coming Roman Catholic, but they're coming from all around the world, they speak different languages, they have different perspectives, maybe even on Roman Catholicism and
mhm,
what it constituted. Plus you have all these tourists who are not members of that faith community, and they're going to have different ideas of saints and holy water and communion and different ideas of how they should behave in sacred spaces, that's going to add a lot more management issues. I think in the case of the Hajj, you're dealing with just mass numbers of people, 1 to 2 million people a year, or at that particular time, sorry. Plus, you have the Umrah, which you have people coming all throughout the year. But you don't have to worry about other religious groups or non-believers that come. Maybe those trying to sneak in, but those, you don't have to worry about that. But it's a totally different story when you have an open pilgrimage system.
Yes.
Or if you're in a place where, like Temple Square, half the people who are coming are not members of your faith. That takes a different type of management dynamic that you're not going to find at the Hajj or at Lourdes, where 85% of the people coming are Roman Catholic. And so again, there's a cultural context. There's a visitation context. It's about the types of visitors that are coming. And also, how are you interpreting a site? What is it you want people to leave having been done to them in a positive way? Is it a feeling? Is it an experience? Is it, I'm just interested in the money? And so I think there's so many factors involved, and each site is different. But at the end of the day, people are going for similar reasons. Either they're going because they're interested in heritage and they want to be educated, or they're going because they're religiously motivated. And those are two different groups of people. And you have to figure out, how do I manage this broad spectrum?
Hmm.
And that is not an easy thing to do. And so I think there's a lot more work that has to be done trying to figure out best practices. And best practices that may not necessarily take a lot of money, because if you're in Rome, there's a lot of money. If you're a small Catholic shrine in a rural area, you don't have a lot of money. So what are the best practices where we don't have to worry necessarily about money, even though we do need money, but things that can be done simply and effectively to maintain and the sense of place at a site, but also care for all these visitors, but also, how do we maintain the site in perpetuity? It's complex.
It is complex, and it is going to continue to be more complex as the world shrinks and more people are traveling, and the ways people are traveling are changing, and it takes less time to get across the world, which means more people are going to be crossing the globe. So it seems like the management piece of this is only going to continue to be more interesting and demand more responses and more collaboration with the local people who are actually the guardians of these sites.
Absolutely. Yeah, as we call it in geography, time-space compression, where the world gets smaller because of information communication technologies, as well as transportation technologies. And as the world shrinks and we have a rising middle class, we are seeing what we call the democratization of travel. It used to be just the really rich. And
Mhm.
then the upper middle class, now pretty much anyone with a decent amount of money can travel. And so more people going to religious sites every year, for pilgrimage or tourism purposes, that puts a lot of stress on the physical sites themselves, where you've got wear and tear, you've got noise, you've got litter, you have graffiti, you have people wanting to take parts of the site away as a souvenir. Uh, and in some cultures, noise is acceptable at a religious site. At other cultures, silence is acceptable. Hard to have silence in a place where you got 10,000 people walking around and they're all talking. I went to the Sistine Chapel earlier this year, and every 5 minutes, there was a voice in the loudspeaker saying, Silencio, silence. And it would be quiet for about 30 seconds, and then the dull roar, and then everyone's
Yeah.
talking, and then Silencio. And, so it's, how do you maintain that sense of the sacred culturally when people either don't care or they don't know what the appropriate standards of behavior are? And no amount of education often is going to change the way people are going to act, because culturally it's just ingrained in them. This is what you do or you don't do in certain spaces. And that those ideas may be incongruent with what you want to have happen at a religious site.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, noise does not feel sacred, and I've realized that that is a bias that isn't an objective truth, and so
Hmm.
I often have to uh, check in with myself about how I'm experiencing a site when there's too much noise, or if or there's a lot of different types of noise, because it really impacts my perception of a site.
Absolutely.
I would really like to talk about some of your latest publications. I'd like to hear about the one that you published as a book chapter with Kieran. Was it in 2024, 2023?
Somewhere in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to hear about that. And then I also want to hear about this new volume that you're editing with our colleague Natasha Sharma that just looks super fascinating, and I'm actually working on a contribution, to an abstract for that because it looks like such a cool project.
I know you're
So
selective, so thank you. I know you're selective and
well,
picky, so
when I saw who was editing it, I said, "Oh, I wanna be a part of that one," because I know both of your work, and I know your level of uh scholarship and integrity, and so yes, I would definitely want to be a part of any project that the two of you are working on together. uh,
thank you.
so Kieran, the chapter, I actually don't have it in front of me. I wrote down the other book, but I didn't write down what your chapter was called.
So I think the chapter you want me to talk about is the dark side of pilgrimage and religious tourism.
Yes, that's it.
A lot of times when people travel and they say they're doing it for religious reasons, it seems to be that people say, oh, well, you're being very altruistic in what you're doing. And so don't worry about the mess that you're making. We'll clean it up for you. Pilgrims are good. Tourists are bad when it comes to the environment, when it comes to noise, when it comes to pollution, when it comes to wear and tear on sites. Because pilgrims are seen as being more altruistic again, or I have higher, purer motives, or they do, then they're not seen as bad tourists. It's the other tourists with the lesser, baser motivations that are seen as bad. Pilgrim good, tourist bad. But in this paper, we were looking at the idea that pilgrims also do wear and tear. Pilgrims also pollute the environment. I think about a chapter in one of the books that Kieran and I edited on pilgrimage and the environment. And one of them was about the Hajj and how there is so much waste created by pilgrims. Plastic waste, just affluent garbage, that there are millions and millions of dollars a year spent just on cleaning up after the pilgrimage. Or Kieran has published a chapter in a different edited book that talks about uh, pilgrims, where where the pilgrims, 400,000 of them, will walk from town to town on a 14-day trek to get to the destination. And the amount of waste they create and leave in the towns that they stop at every night is absolutely tremendous. But no one says anything because they're pilgrims, and that's okay. And so we wrote this chapter called The Dark Side of Pilgrimage and Religious Tourism. We talked about a lot of different things. For example, uh, the religious tourism economy. The economy that's built around religious tourism and pilgrimage is unequal. It's uneven. Just like all other forms of tourism, there are winners and there are losers. There are people that are going to make a lot of money and people that are not going to see any of this money, but yet they're going to have to deal with the after effects, like who pays for all the policing and for all the people that work in fire and in the hospital. Well, that's going to be the local population. How much of that money is actually of that cost is actually offset by pilgrim expenditure? Probably not a lot. And so that becomes a particular issue. We also talked about the natural and built environment and the damage that pilgrimage actually does. I've written before on something I call over pilgrimage, which is related to the idea of over tourism. Sometimes you have so many pilgrims that even the local residents who benefit from pilgrimage might become irritated because of that. And so we talk about that in our chapter. We also talk about basic things like water and who gets to use the water. We talk about, for example, at some shrines in India, everyone brings a food offering. Well, the god isn't going to eat the food offering. And even the priests at the site won't eat all the food. So where does it go? It goes into your waste management system, which becomes so backlogged that you can't take care of the waste management of your local residents, let alone the pilgrims that bring, millions of pounds of food every year. And so that becomes a real issue. There's also the socio-cultural and political issues that arise, where are you catering to the pilgrims or to the tourists? We talk about how in many areas in India, there's a conflict over, you have this beautiful area, but now you're tearing down old buildings to build new hotels, and that becomes a cultural but also a political issue that arises. So we talk about these sort of things in our chapter, not to say that pilgrimage is bad, but to say that pilgrimage does have its dark side in terms of economics, culture, environment. These are all things that we also have to be aware of and not just give pilgrims and pilgrimage a pass and blame everything on tourism when pilgrims and pilgrimage also does cause environmental, sociocultural, and economic damage.
Yes. And I love the idea that by looking at a group of people as pilgrims, that means they're holy and sacred, and somehow they're not littering and um, causing disruptions in communities or um, all the things that humans do when humans travel. So yeah, that's fascinating. So this the book that you are getting ready to start uh editing and there's a call for papers right now is called Dark Tourism Rituals and Micro Rituals, and I'd love to hear more about that.
I would too, uh, because this was actually Natasha's idea,
Okay.
and she's asked me to join her
Yeah.
on this project, and I think it's a fascinating project. I edited a book back in 2020 on dark tourism and pilgrimage, and looking at the intersections of the two. And I love this book because we're looking at dark tourism rituals, large rituals, but also micro rituals, and how they're performed and negotiated, and how dark tourism sites are given meaning through these rituals. A lot of times when we talk about tourism, we talk about tourists who passively consume or observe a site. We don't talk about the ways that they make meaning, not just to themselves
Hmm.
personally, but to a place. And there hasn't been a lot of work done on rituals, which are understood as symbolic, embodied, or repetitive practices that play a critical role in understanding how individuals and societies engage with sites of death and tragedy and loss. And so the whole purpose of this book is to take a look at the way that people interact with sites from an active, not a passive perspective. Uh, we are just really interested in a wide range of different types of rituals or micro rituals that occur within the dark tourism sphere. It can range from ghost walks to zombie parades, to horror tours that celebrate death or fright as performance, uh, maybe lighting candles at Auschwitz to honor Holocaust victims, or different types of grassroots memorializations, like spontaneous shrines at the sides of roads where an accident, a death occurred. We want to look at things such as leaving pebbles or flowers on memorial plaques, or tying ribbons, bombing memorials, or uh, taking photographs at Pearl Harbor or ringing the bell at Pearl Harbor,
Hmm.
war reenactments, or leaving notes, cards, and flowers at celebrity graves. I mean, we are interested in the wide gamut of rituals at dark tourism sites. We've already received some chapters, one looking at crossing borders and and as dark tourism sites, especially like the U.S. Mexico border, and how that ties into rituals of commemoration. We have another chapter that is going to be looking at people who lament the death of natural environments,
Hmm.
as with global
Like
warming.
glacier grief,
Yeah, that sort of thing,
glacier
right?
funerals. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a form of dark tourism happening in different areas around the world. We, I mean, the book we want is just something that looks at the gamut of these dark tourism rituals, like mourning and rituals at funerals, or looking at uh, pilgrimage as dark tourism, or looking at performances or reenactments again, or looking at nationalistic and civic rituals like Anzac Day in Australia, or going to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in the UK and France. We're interested in violence and punishment as spectacle, gladiatorial games, or tourists that mimic public execution poses, which we might say that why would you want to do that? But people do that. We're interested in therapeutic and healing rituals. How do you negotiate trauma? By going back to sites where trauma took place. Cathartic participation or post tsunami ceremonies in Thailand, for example. Or what about rituals around animal death and sacrifice and extinction? Or again, rituals of ecological mourning, or rituals in the digital realm? Or what about virtual shrines or live stream memorials, and how this all interacts within the context of dark tourism and ritual? So this is a very large project that we're doing. We have 6 different parts, and we're looking at least 18 to 20 chapters throughout the
Yeah.
entire book. It's just
It
large.
sounds fantastic. I can't wait to see the final volume, and I am not submitting a paper on this topic, but when you said it, I want to see a paper on this topic because I've been thinking a lot of I and I've searched for people who are writing about it. I'm very interested in roadside memorials.
Hmm.
And there's a number of them near where I live in New Hampshire, and it's a fascinating practice how they've evolved. There is and so maybe there's somebody who would I want to hear about it. I really want to interview someone too on this podcast who has some expertise in this area. There's one roadside memorial quite close by where two high school boys were killed in a car accident, and of course the site has become a shrine. There are wooden crosses that have their football uniforms covering them, and so it's also quite emotional to see this. It's not the typical roadside memorial that has a cross or maybe some flowers or a name. I mean, this is sort of like an effigy of these two boys, and so I would, I want to see a paper. I hope you can. I hope someone submits a paper to the volume that's on
I
this.
I think there was a book written several years ago. I'll see if I can find it for you, where someone
Okay.
drove through Mexico and mapped out every single uh, roadside memorial.
Wow.
And
I would
so
be
I will
very
see if
interested to read that.
I'll see if I'm also interested in wayside chapels.
Yes.
So in Brandon, Manitoba, where I worked at Brandon University for 6 to 7 years, at the intersection of the Trans Canada Highway and the highway that takes you into the city of Brandon, there's this really small chapel. It sits like 6 people. And this is where truckers will stop and they'll pray, continue on. Or people who are hitchhiking will stop and stay the night and then continue on. And and they have a guest book. And I got copies of the guest book from like 10 years, past 10 years. And I'm curious to know why people go there, where they're coming from. And you see this in Niagara Falls has a wayside chapel. You just see these little churches on the sides of
Mhm.
highways that people stop with to pray. And I've always been curious about that. That's something we should talk about at some point. It's very similar,
It is, it's
but different at the
fascinating.
same time. Yeah.
Yes, because it's, focused on at some level, it's focused on the living and not necessarily people who died, but it does
Hmm.
remind me of, in Slovakia, I visited a number of years ago, and there are a number of roadside Catholic chapels so
Hmm.
that I mean, they're maybe every they look uniform, but maybe every 2 miles, and they were placed there for peasants who are working in the fields to be able to go pray and, to engage their Catholic faith, right at the side of the road, and I think from a functional standpoint, I see similarities between these wayside chapels you're describing and then these little Catholic shrines, that are everywhere, they dot the landscape because they're deeply, personal, aren't they? That, they I think they take into consideration just the average person who is traveling, who needs, some place to pray and to engage their faith or to ask for intercession, or in the case of someone traveling along a road to to pray for safety or to
Hmm.
maybe give thanks if they have avoided some type of car accident or so yeah, that's a super fascinating project.
And also, I think the one I was looking at was designed for truckers in particular, because if you're on the road for 8, 9 days, you don't get to go to church.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and you go to this truck stop, and there's the Wayside Shrine. So I think it's just fascinating. It's kind of like when I was traveling through Michigan once with my family, and I saw a sign that said "Got Faith." It was this religious
Yes.
billboard, and I was like, "Well, why would you put that there?" Oh, because as you're traveling, you have a captive audience. Like, what do I do when I'm driving through the Midwestern part of the United States? I'm looking at road signs. There's nothing else to see. And so you see all these religious signs and crosses at the side of the road. I wrote a chapter on it because I was just fascinated by these billboards, religious billboards in the United States, which I don't think you see in very many other places around the world. But again,
No, I have not seen one.
it's about people on the move and
Yep.
bringing religion with them as they move in a
Yes.
non-religious context. Really fascinating
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many new directions that we can explore, and pilgrimage and religious tourism and dark tourism and rituals and micro rituals. I mean, the humans are going to create meaning in so many different ways, and so when they do this over enough years and enough generations, then there are kind of concrete rituals that emerge, and so we're never gonna run out of, topics to talk about.
We are not.
Um, it what's the last question I wanna ask you? What are some projects that are on the horizon for you beyond the book that you've just talked about and beyond some of your interest in maybe more delving into roadside chapels or shrines? What else excites you about this field?
The potential of publishing with Heather Warfield
Ooh,
is what excites
yay.
me. I would consider it in my point of my career a feather in my cap
That's
to
so
publish.
sweet, Dan. I That would be an honor. So, yes, the answer to that is yes.
We will talk about that.
Yeah.
I would love to edit a volume, and we've talked about this many years ago on natural pilgrimage sites. I
Yes.
don't think enough attention has been put on forests and rivers and the fact that in many African communities, the only reason why you have trees is because it's part of a Catholic sanctuary.
Mhm.
I think there needs to be a lot more work done on natural religious sites. I published a book chapter on it, and there was one or two scholars I can think of that do this extensively, but I think we need more. I think we need to have more research on therapeutic pilgrimage, like kind of the stuff that you do, right?
Yeah.
Whether it based trauma based,
Mhm.
in particular, I think is a really important area. Uh, I think we need to do more in management. Definitely. In fact, my friend Kieran and I were thinking about doing a book on pilgrimage and urban planning, because we usually plan at the site, but not around the site. I think we need to do more there as well. I have to pull up my CV. I've got like 7 or 8 different projects that I'm working on right now that I want to do. But at the end of the day, I think you're right. There is so much that we can talk about. I'm just afraid that we do all this great writing, but it doesn't make a difference. I think sometimes I write, and who is my audience? It's other academics. It's not for the people that really need it on the ground. So I've got to figure out at this last part of my career, the next 15 years or so, how do I make my work of value, not just to the academic community, but how can I do actually applied research? How can I make a difference in the lives of religious site managers? How can I make a difference in terms of the pilgrim experience, the religious tourism experience? How can I help with conflict at religious sites when it comes to interpretation or management or cultural misunderstandings? I think that's what we need more of, actual applied research that makes a difference. And so that's something that I want to kind of turn away from the theoretical, as much as I love doing the theoretical stuff. And how do I make a difference? And that's something I need to figure out.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. I think that we oftentimes we as academics and researchers view sources of knowledge as proprietary, and that we are generators of knowledge in some way, and we have often detached this knowledge from those who are practitioners and those who have other types of knowledge. And I really agree with you. I think we need to be doing a lot more collaboration with those who are living at sites, who are practicing their own spirituality in whatever way that is, and a lot less talking at people.
Yeah. I'm very good at talking at people, but
Well, we all are.
academically at least, I'm an introvert, so I don't
Yeah.
like talking, period. But uh, I think, yeah, academics as a whole, we need to do a better job in that area. And I think that's what you do with this podcast. You talk to people on the ground, you talk to other academics and see how their research is helping to change lives. And at the end of the day, that's what good academics do, is we want to improve the quality of life of people that we study and that we interact with. And hopefully I can start doing a little bit more of that than I have been doing in the past.
Very, very well said. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. It's always time always flies by, and it's always nice to catch up with you. And I look forward to times when we can collaborate on all the things that we've been talking
Hmm.
about.
Yes. Thank you, Heather. I appreciate the invitation to be on your podcast.